A hospital once depended on memory, instinct, and candlelight, because a blackout meant choosing who lived and who didn't. Before backup systems, a single power failure turned medicine into a race against darkness. So how did doctors decide life or death when electricity vanished? The answer begins where most safety nets simply didn't exist. A nurse in 1948 began her shift with a clipboard, a fountain pen, and a mind trained to remember every dose, every symptom, every face. In those hallways, patient charts lived on thick paper, filled with looping cursive and margin notes. Doctors traced the course of fever or pain with pencil marks on bedside cards. Vital signs were recorded by hand, then compared from memory during rounds. If a patient needed morphine at midnight, it was the nurse's own wristwatch that kept the schedule, not an alarm or a blinking monitor. When emergencies struck, staff hurried from room to room, calling for help by voice, not by intercom. There were no digital records to flag a sudden drop in blood pressure, no automated alerts to warn of danger. Every decision, when to check a pulse, when to rush for oxygen, rested on experience, intuition, and the scrawled notes tucked at the foot of each bed. In this world, the margin for error was thin, and the line between memory and survival was often blurred. By the late 1950s, hospital corridors buzzed with a new kind of hope. Diesel generators tucked in basements, promising a safety net when the grid faltered. But early machines were unreliable, often covering only a fraction of the building. When the Northeast blackout swept across New York in November 1965, Bellevue Hospital's generator sputtered, then stalled. Staff scrambled to restart it by hand. In surgical suites, doctors finished operations by flashlight, nurses holding mirrors to bounce beams onto open wounds. Some units waited in darkness as battery lamps flickered. Even where generators worked, they powered only a handful of outlets, leaving elevators, labs, and entire wards stranded. Across the city, nearly a quarter of hospital generators failed to start on the first try. That night, technology faltered, and the old rules returned. Human hands, steady nerves, and the thin glow of emergency lamps. The promise of backup power proved fragile, and the risk never truly left. At 6:30 in the evening, the first flicker of uncertainty swept through the hospital as the main power grid failed. For a brief moment, the emergency generators hummed to life, a familiar promise of protection. But at 8:30 p.m., the backup system itself faltered. The low drone in the halls faded, replaced by a stillness that made every footstep echo. In the ICU, Dr. Chow stood surrounded by monitors gone dark and the sudden quiet where machines once beeped. The only light came from cell phone screens and the dim glow of battery-powered clocks, counting down the minutes left for ventilators and infusion pumps. There was no warning, no second chance, just the realization that every device depended on a battery with a half-hour to spare. The safety net had vanished, leaving only people and the ticking of unseen timers. Every decision from that moment on would be a race against the dark. Dr. Chow's voice cut through the darkness. 30 minutes. That was all the battery life left on the ventilators. 8 trauma surgeons crowded together, each calculating who could be moved safely and who needed to go first. The ICU became a triage zone, every second shaved from the clock. 7 patients, too fragile to risk a power loss, were rushed to outside hospitals, ambulances waiting in the night, headlights barely piercing the gloom. 9 more, were wheeled through shadowed corridors to other wings, staff guiding beds by the beams of cell phones. Nurses called out vital signs, hands steady in the chaos. Manual ventilation kits stood ready at every bedside, a last resort if time ran out. There was no debate, no protocol to consult, just the quiet urgency of a team that knew the cost of delay. As the minutes slipped away, every action was a gamble against the dark. In North Texas, winter 2011, the fate of 20 hospitals hung on a single decision. The power company, Oncor, faced rolling blackouts, and no law told them who to save first. Steve Love, head of the hospital council, spent sleepless nights cataloging every meter, pleading for hospitals to be spared. He added 23 meters to the priority list, fighting to keep the lights on in critical wards. Even then, only 30% of the load could be guaranteed. Survival came down to negotiation, not regulation, a quiet contest of influence where a phone call could mean the difference between life and darkness. For staff inside, the knowledge that protection rested on personal persuasion, not policy, weighed heavier than the blackout itself. In August 2003, a power surge swept through the Northeast, plunging 75 New York hospitals into darkness. 4 of those facilities lost all electricity when their transfer switches failed, leaving backup generators useless. Neonatal incubators fell silent, forcing nurses to hand-ventilate newborns in the dark. In one hospital, the outage destroyed lab equipment and spoiled blood supplies, racking up $12 million in damages. Dr. Mark Ruiz stood in the chaos, counting every minute a baby went without heat or oxygen. The numbers told their own story. When the backup plan breaks, the losses are measured in both dollars and lives. Even with modern safeguards, hospital outages still happen. In every blackout, split-second choices return. Our systems may advance, but in darkness, survival still relies on human hands and human judgment.